franktalks.com.
This program does not represent the views of this station and may be considered offensive to some listeners. This program may contain mature subject matter, including frank discussions of controversial topics. It is intended for mature, open-minded audiences. Discretion is highly advised. This program is entirely independently produced by and is copyrighted by Frank. It is broadcast here under license.
You're listening to Frank Talks, Pleasures and Lifestyles, and I'm Frank, because I have to be. We have got a very interesting program for you tonight. In studio with us is Mr. Jim A. Brown, and he is a gentleman with an incredible amount of knowledge on the topic of secret societies, and we're going to be picking his brain about secret societies. Jim is based here in Montreal and was good enough to come down to our studios today. Let's go right now to our guest in studio, Mr. Jim Brown. How are you doing, Jim?
Just fine, thanks, Frank.
All right, we're going to ask you to talk directly into the microphone here to make sure that you can be heard. How's that?
Okay.
Let's start off by asking you the first question. What is a secret society?
A secret society is, in the sense that I want to discuss it, is a gathering of men who take blood oaths of secrecy and have an agenda to take many of the key posts in the positions that affect our lives in society in terms of jobs.
Now, how long have you been studying the topic of secret societies?
I guess I could say I've been studying it since reasonably conscientiously since about 1960. It was on Halloween 1960. My father had just bought a new drugstore pharmacy in a small town in eastern Ontario, Ottawa Valley. And he was putting on a new storefront. And 6 fellows came through the front of it in a hay wagon who happened to be in the Orange Lodge. My father beat them off with a crowbar, and he wasn't exactly a young man. I mean, they were in good shape, 18, 20, 19, whatever. And I was guarding the dispensary with an axe, and he instructed me that if they got past him, I was to use the axe, and I wouldn't be charged. And as an Air Force medical officer, World War II, for years and years and years, and running a Knights of Columbus Army hut for an extra year after the war while they were sewing people up to come back, he knew the law on self-defense. And that's where I learned it. And that's also where I understood that I've got to try and find these 6 guys because we couldn't identify them. Like, he called the Ontario Provincial Police in Pembroke and in Renfrew, and neither detachment would come because they said they were busy. There were no reported incidents in either town since we had family in both towns and we knew, okay? And Cobden, where we were, didn't have a police force. It had a Masonic lodge. And years later, I studied Masonic lodges in the Ontario Provincial Police, overlapping with Special Services, Army Organization and Tactics, Canadian Armed Forces training programs, you see, which suddenly answered the question. I mean, I assumed the reason why they didn't show up was because they were in with these guys. But when I went into National Defense Headquarters archives and checked a few things during the Gulf War, when I had, and prior to the Gulf War actually, because we hadn't declared war yet, but I had war powers as an officer. And I was allowed to look at a lot of information that I couldn't take with me, and I was allowed to digest it. And anything that I could take with me, I was permitted to take with me. And one of the things I digested was Army Organization and Tactics, the SS guys who did a real job on me starting at about 15. We're also training OPP officers in the same camp at the same time, and 8 other camps, you see. That's a secret society.
It sounds like you have a long history in dealing with secret societies. How has that changed the way you see the world?
Well, it changes everything once you have a grasp of how enormous it is. You live in a context of taking certain preparations. You know, if you're going someplace out of town or whatever, you might contact somebody and just let them know you're going to be leaving at a certain time and you should be in at a certain time. I do that from time to time. And when I was driving, I did it all the time, because when I was organizing a liberation front up there for about a 5-6 year period, whatever, it was essential to do that, because there were many situations where the authorities were using violence and torture and various other things to force and coerce the citizens to put up with whatever they were doing.
Another question I have is, how difficult is it to fight off a secret society?
Well, the biggest weapon they have is secrecy. In other words, if nobody knows that it exists in such a well-organized fashion, nobody's going to worry about it. Now, when somebody comes up to me and says, I hate all cops, I say, well, that's wrong to hate all cops. It's wrong to hate all soldiers. It's wrong to hate all of anybody. Do you hate all French people, all black people, all women? How can you generalize like that? Everybody has a brain. And not all cops are in Masonic lodges. Most of them are, granted, but not all of them. And so you have to take those things into account when you hate a cop, or you hate anybody for that matter.
Now, when you talk about secret societies, you're talking about something that's not very apparent, if I have my understanding correct here. How can you recognize somebody who's a member of a secret society?
Pardon me. Well, there are signals and grips and whatnot that are identifiable, but again, those are secret. I just happen to know some of them. I was being tortured in a police station one time in Toronto by, I believe it was 5 officers. And they usually expect you to shut your eyes because you're in so much pain. But I'm relatively experienced at being tortured, and I kept my eyes open. And one of them stood off from the others and did the Masonic distress signal. And while he was doing this visual signal, which involves turning the head to the right, and as if you're looking at the sun, you put your hand up to your forehead, and then you put your heels together in a square while the torture goes on. And whatever you say is the point of that particular lodge meeting, that ritual. And this one smiled in my direction and said, Knights of Columbus. Now, the odds are I would have had my eyes closed, and even if I didn't have my eyes closed, I wouldn't have known the signal. So he was banking on me not knowing what the signal was, because he was smiling at me while I was being carved up with a knife. I had leather burns, I had crushed bones, and they broke my glasses and a few other things. Crushed my glasses because of the plastic type, you know. Anyway, I recognized the signal, and the idea was to make me think it was the Knights of Columbus doing this to me. You see, because that's a rival society, which is not particularly secret, I don't think. It's a fraternal Catholic organization. Which is basically, that was an eye-opener, and it blew me away as it was happening, because I was being tortured, and the cop who was behind me was black, and you have to be a Mason to be in there for a lodge meeting like that, for a ritual like that. So a whole number of revelations hit me all at once in that particular 4-hour session. Number one, they have black cops, but they have to be Freemasons. Okay, I wonder if it's the same with the Oriental ones and the Indo-Pakistani ones and all these other equality things that they do when they say they're really trying to be equal here. You see what I mean? That was a revelation. Also, pinning this whole operation on the Knights of Columbus, trying to, that is, in secret, because who would believe such a bizarre tale? Now, all these were revelations at the same time as I was experiencing about 5-6 genres of pain with my eyes open. And I wasn't screaming because I knew better than to give them the pleasure of screaming. I didn't show. I kept a poker face.
I got to ask you something.
Yeah.
Having gone through all of that, how can you put that behind you and live the life you're living now?
Well, you try and get your case into the International Criminal Court in The Hague. I first tried I began seeking international court justice in 1979, February. I reported the murder of an associate of mine to the United Nations Human Rights Commission and demanded action, a police murder. I got a good response from them. I worked my way through 3 international courts, world courts, and found at The Hague and then to Luxembourg and then to Vaduz, Liechtenstein, none of these jurisdictions had jurisdiction over individuals, only over organizations or national groups, peoples, I should say, and corporations and that sort of thing. So I had a real, I was really upset when Vaduz told me it's the end of the line. And I told Vaduz, I said, why don't you have one for individuals? What's the matter with you guys? And he said, sir, that's a very good question.
And we'll be right back after this.
Frank Talks is sponsored in part by the book I'm a Man, That's My Job, The Philosophy of a Seducer. What is inner game? There's a lot of contradictory information out there, and one size does not fit all. Your inner game is as unique and personal as your signature or your fingerprints. This book provides you with the means to create your own seduction persona. This is a workbook, which means we will work together, and by the end, you will have developed your own personal inner game. By this, learn what it means to be a man and what the role of the modern man in today's society is that will attract him to the woman he wants. Learn about how men and women think differently and how to take the lead in a relationship. This book is for you at franktalks.com.
Frank Talks is sponsored in part by the Adult Male Virgin Seminar and Telephone Consultations. Guys, if the only breast you ever touched was in a bucket of chicken, you need the Adult Male Virgin Seminar. If the only thing you've licked recently has been your fingers to turn the pages of a book, you need the Adult Male Virgin Seminar. If the only female body part you are familiar with wears a cape, can fly, or has superpowers, you need the Adult Male Virgin Seminar. If you think the G-Spot is the name of a new club, you need the Adult Male Virgin Seminar. If the words missionary conjures up images of guys in long robes, you need the Adult Male Virgin Seminar. If the only sensation your fingers have had are pressing the buttons on your remote control, then you need the Adult Male Virgin Seminar. Do you know what it means when a woman asks you up to her place for coffee? If you think that she is thirsty for caffeine, then you definitely need the Adult Male Virgin Seminar. Only available at franktalks.com. Frank helped adult boys become men.
Frank Talks is sponsored in part by the Calibrated Storytelling Seminar. Have you ever felt tongue-tied when talking to a woman and did not know what to say next? This seminar provides the structure to create personalized stories that connect to a woman's emotional needs. Calibration is about putting people into the categories and then modifying your behavior. Do you want to learn how to be truthful about who you are, but in an interesting and seductive way? If you want women to like you for the real you, then this seminar is for you. The Calibrated Storytelling Seminars and telephone consultations, only available at franktalks.com.
You're listening to Frank Talks, Pleasures, and Lifestyles, and I'm Frank because I have to be. We're in studio with James A. Brown, who is incredibly knowledgeable about secret societies, and we're finding out a little bit about his life and how he's dealt with secret societies. Jim, just before we went to break, you were talking about going into international courts and battling secret societies in the international courts system. Unfortunately, we had to cut you off, but let's go right back to that to finish up your thought.
Okay, well, you asked me, I think the question was, how did I put that behind me? Well, one of the ways you put it behind you, because that's an isolated instance, okay, but this happened many times to me over the course of decades. I decided to take it into a fight on an international scale to have the Rome Charter and the Geneva Accords enforced in Canada by the world if Canadian judiciary was too Masonic to do it themselves, you see. So that changes your lifestyle because you have to pay attention to the case. And then you realize that maybe you'll put 7 or 8 generals in the caboose someday. And if you can ever accomplish that even 10 minutes before you expire, then that is pleasure.
Excellent. Now, in private conversations that we've had before getting here into the studio, you were telling me about how you tried to become an academic in the area of secret societies, and that you were blocked with that. What was your obstacle in becoming an academic of secret societies?
Well, there were a number of things that happened. I'll just sort of skip over a few little points. I was going to get a master's degree in film on the subject of secret societies and related material, but I was going to make it an autobiographical kind of film. And I had written a 4-hour miniseries, which could be easily expanded to 12 hours. So there were 5 people on the faculty committee to decide whether I could do the degree or not, including the chairman and, people of impeccable standing in the film community, who voted for me. And then it came around to a CIA guy who vetoed it. So I was denied entrance to the graduate program at York. I applied to the Canadian Studies Department at Trent to do a master's in Aboriginal Studies, specifically the history of the Algonquin Nation from a used Chevrolet. Okay, because I was born and raised in Algonquin territory, and I know a lot of people. I looked up a lot of the Smithsonian stuff on Algonquin Indians, and just from my friends in the Algonquin Nation, I had more access to more information than the Smithsonian had, just for example. So I was prevented from doing that because I had to be a full-blooded status Indian or something was the excuse that was used. But I don't think anybody's ever done a history of that yet, and I don't know if anybody ever will. Okay, because in any event, next was Concordia. I tried to get in here to do an MA on secret societies, and I was told that I simply couldn't do that by the history department. I was told I should just do it on my own and forget about it. McGill turned me down because I was 1/20th of a point in my average below their minimum accepted standard or something like that, which is a technicality that I think I was going to do it in communications and show secret societies in communications. Heaven forbid. I also outlined and wrote up a summary of a course I wanted to teach at York, which I gave to the Senate. And I had the backing of some top-notch people at York who recommended me and sent me to the dean in charge of academic affairs. And I didn't even get a response. It's just a taboo. And to me, that's not what a university is supposed to be. A taboo on discussing and thinking things that maybe some of the people that run the university belong to, and they don't want it discussed or known among the students and the faculty and the public at large.
Then why did you continuing your research on secret societies if you weren't going to get any support from the academic circles?
Because it's very, very important when they have that much grassroots control and are involved in things like organized rape and torture and murder and all manner of crime against humanity, as well as property crimes, tying up departments and using public departments with they work there and they can stonewall stuff going through the machine, which has disastrous effects on individuals. And when they target you, that's what happens in your life. That affects your lifestyle. I didn't get a baby bonus check when I was both my daughters, when I was suing in the custody case, and I was looking after one of them 4 days and nights a week and the other one 7 days and nights a week. I didn't get one of the baby bonus checks, and the federal government refuses to acknowledge that they owe me $6,000 in milk checks. So I had to go out with my poetry books and sell them in the street to make up the milk checks so I could raise my children while I was showing that I was a responsible enough parent to win the custody case, which I did win, by the way.
Good for you. We're going to be
first man in Canada to win custody of a female child. My lawyer told me it was a precedent, and he had been afraid to tell me, because if he had told me, I might have got cold feet and been afraid that, he knew if he didn't tell me, I would just assume I could win this because I'm right, which I was. You see, I forced 2 judges to resign because they were Freemasons and there was a conflict of interest. The 3rd judge put the children on the stand, and then he awarded my settlement.
And on that note, we're going to go to some music here on Frank Talks, Pleasures and Lifestyles.
Frank Talks is sponsored in part by Everything Out of Her Mouth is a Test, a man's guide to the emotional needs of women. What would your life be like if you knew exactly what to say and do with women? This book is for the guy that simply wants to learn how to handle women's tests by addressing her emotional needs. By this, you create the type of attraction that will make her see you as the one she was destined to be with. This book will teach you how to get the woman you want and how to keep her. Everything Out of Her Mouth is a Test is the Rosetta Stone for men to understand exactly what a woman means when she speaks and how to respond. Is that worth changing your life forever? Buy this book at franktalks.com now.
Frank Talks is sponsored in part by From Loser to Seducer by Frank B. Kermit. Ladies, is there a man in your life that got dumped for being clingy, needy, or was told he was a loser, but you still think he's a nice guy and want to help him? He could be a relative or even a friend, and you know he needs the help. Do you want to be the one to give him the gift that will change his life forever? How about the gift of a great biography? Buy him the book, From Loser to Seducer by Frank B. Kermit. It is the story of a nice guy who triumphs over his inner demons to find his own hidden power. Help the nice guy in your life discover his inner seducer to find his soulmate. Buy this book now at franktalks.com.
Frank Talks is sponsored in part by the Adult Male Virgin Seminars and Telephone Consultations. If you are an adult and want to get a handle on this once and for all, you need this seminar. Being an adult male virgin can be most stigmatizing in today's society. You feel like a failure in the eyes of the mass culture around you, alienated from your male friends who all talk about their sexual conquests, and you must hide this shameful secret lest they use it against you. And the very personal pain, anguish, and despair that cannot be described by words that haunts you every moment of your life. Enough is enough. It is time for male virgins to take charge of their sex lives. Frank gives you the rules of winning in this seminar, the Adult Male Virgin Seminars and Telephone Consultations. Make your first time the best time of her life. Only available at franktalks.com. Frank helps adult boys turn into men.
We're going to go right back to James A. Brown, a gentleman who's very knowledgeable about secret societies. Jim, if people want more resources to learn more about secret societies, what are some of the resources that you yourself have come across and that might you know can be available to our listeners?
Well, Frank, I guess I should tell you that I have a used bookstore here in Montreal, and I have a section on secret societies and military religions, going back as early as 2800 BCE. But some of these are very rare, scholarly, limited edition 400 kind of thing from Brill in Holland or Oxford or Princeton, whatever. But they're limited. The Brill ones in particular are very, very expensive. So it would be a shock for some people, I suppose, how much you have to spend on this sort of thing to get documentation.
What would you say is considered a reasonable price for that category of book?
I've paid as much as $250 for a limited edition, one copy of a limited edition like that, hardcover. That's not unusual. If it's got what I want in it, you don't want to wait 10 or 15 years before Harvard and Oxford get the trickle-down effect, right? You want to get it from the scholars at the very top of world archaeology, in other words, Hittitology, Egyptology, whatever it is you're doing. You want to get the newest, best, most up-to-date material on digs, on translations, on information, on everything. So that's why I buy for myself Brill books. Now, this is my personal library, but I list it on my web store simply because people should have access to this material and know that it exists. Now, as I say, there might be a synopsis someday in another textbook with a mass run for universities, 10 or 15 years, published by Oxford or one of the university publishers. But when you're doing what I'm doing, you want it right away. You wanted it 20 years ago. You wanted it 2,000 years ago, 500 years ago.
If you could give us a rundown of some of those titles and authors that people should be asking you about if they want to get into secret society study.
All right. If you're gonna, because I'm really bad on remembering titles and authors, spelling or whatever. Because as I say, I'm not doing a thesis. I am by osmosis reading this material and just digesting as much as I can. I don't have time to do a thesis because I've got business and other headaches. But to be able to do what I'm doing, you see, this is another aspect of lifestyle. First of all, it's a pleasure to find out when you read this stuff and put it together with your experience and see how the patterns are so similar in military organizations. 2800 BCE, 1750 BCE, 1100 BCE, 500 BCE, 54 BCE, 450 AD, Somalia with the airborne regiment. You see these patterns of abuse, of organized abuse, what I call organized abuse, you see, because I'm a military man. Organized abuse is organized abuse, but it's often done by lodges, military schismatic field lodges, they're called. When you read Masonic definitions in books, I have a lot of those in my store too, it's defined what a schismatic degree is and what a field lodge is and so on and so forth. This is all military stuff. Montreal Masonry, which is represented in the Templar cross of the Montreal flag, was instituted by the British Army, and all these lodges of the British Army in Montreal are numbered by regiment in one of the books that I have around someplace. And then in the constitutions of the Grand Lodge of Quebec, they have changed their names to neighborhood names. You have the the Waverly Lodge. You have the named after the local street or whatever. You see what I mean? It just looks so service clubbish. You see, now good service clubs are great contributions to the community. That is not what we're discussing here. Lodges are not service clubs.
Keeping all of this in mind, can you identify secret societies in our modern day existence? Do they still exist?
Of course, Quebec and Canada and most of the Western world is run by various rites of Freemasonry in terms of military and police infrastructure and the military-industrial complex, we used to call it in the 60s. I think that is no longer a catchphrase. But basically, these are the high flyers that are running things. I mean, when you see George Bush and the leader of Israel shake hands, they are doing a Masonic handshake on the news. But if you're not a Freemason or you don't know the signal, you don't know which signal it is and what they're talking about and how many degrees they're using in the signal. And you never see Arafat doing that because he's not a Freemason, and that's why they're ganging up on him. Never mind anything else that's concerned. The Skin and Bones Club or Skull and Bones Club or whatever it's called that Kerry was associated with is more like a university fraternity. Okay? It's not the same as a lodge. A lodge is not a university campus fraternity. A lodge is how are we going to exterminate.
You're listening to Frank Talks Pleasures and Lifestyles, and I'm Frank because I have to be. We're in studio today with Mr. James A. Brown, who has spent a good part of his life studying and tracking down information on the topic of secret societies. James, before we sign off, any final thoughts?
Well, basically, I wanted to point out that Freemasonry is non-denominational. When the British Army took it to India, we had Hindu Masons. When they took it to other places, we had other kinds of Masons. So there are Jewish Masons, there are Arab Masons. Anybody that agrees with the military religion as defined and the Book of Black Balls and Lodge Rules, who agrees with those rules and takes the blood oaths, is eligible to be a member as long as they never betray a brother. So that means up to murder in the Constitution of the Grand Lodge of Quebec, they can commit any crime except murder, and every Mason is bound to cover up. And at the level of murder, they can use their own conscience.
So one final question for you, Jim. Knowing as much as you know about secret societies has obviously made you a target. You've had obstacles all of your life to accomplish all the things that you've been wanting to accomplish. It's one fight after another, one struggle after another. So I got to ask you, what is that lifestyle like where you're constantly living in fear and constantly obstructed? I mean, how do you find pleasure in life like that?
Well, first of all, I don't really live in fear I'm afraid I could lose this or lose that or whatever, but I'm not afraid of them is what I mean. You become a little bit of a kamikaze after a while. My father once said to me, and he was an Air Force vet, World War II, and medical officer, and he stayed an extra year after the war to sew up the wounded so they could be shipped back. And he said to me one time, because these Knights of Columbus were Catholics, he said, "Jimmy, it's not a sin. It's not a sin to be a fatalist." So I took that to mean that, because most of my uncles anyways, were pilots, okay, and two of them got shot down, didn't come back. And one of them was an ace. Two of them were aces, actually. So what is a lifestyle? I mean, I didn't ask for this, but what kind of lifestyle would I have if I said, "Yeah, boss, hit me again, I like it"? That's a lot worse than trying to take pleasure in struggling against them, basically. As much as I just love to be with the woman I love forever in Shangri-La, for God's sake, okay? Reality intervenes. I can't afford to get off this bloody island I'm marooned on in the St. Lawrence River for the last 18 years, never mind get to Tibet.
Well, Jim, we do wish you a lot of luck.
Thank you very much, Frank.
I'd like to thank Jim A. Brown.
And I want to thank you, too.
And it was just a great opportunity to get him to come down into studio. Good night, everybody.
Frank Talks is sponsored in part by Everything Out of Her Mouth is a Test, a man's guide to the emotional needs of women. Ladies, do you want the man in your life to understand you on your level? Do you want your man to be able to listen to and address all of your emotional needs? Show him how much you really want your relationship to be the best it can be. Everything Out of Her Mouth is a Test makes a perfect gift. The book, written by a man, for men, is endorsed by every woman that reads it. This book is a guide for men to understand exactly what a woman means when she speaks. Is that worth changing your life forever? Buy this book at franktalks.com now.
If you need help with your relationships, my buddy Frank, he's got some tips. Just go to franktalks.com. His advice is better than your mom's. He knows what you're going through, Frank has been there too. So log on to franktalks.com. franktalks.com.
Need help with love, sex, dating, or relationship issues? Help from Frank Kermit, the best-selling author and Canada's most international relationship coach, is only a click away at franktalks.com. What do you do when you feel like a fool? When your heart has been broken again? Pick up the phone or get onto Skype and talk on a private session. Yeah, get a little help from Frank Talks. Whoa, whoa, get by with a little help from Frank Talks. You gotta try a little help from Frank Talks. What do you do when your love goes away? Try coaching one-on-one. How do I sign up to turn things around? Just sign up at franktalks.com. Yeah, get by with help from Frank Talks. I get by with little help from Frank Talks. Time to try a little help from Frank Talks. Does it cost a lot of money? It's the best rate going around. Could it cost a lot of money? Oh, it's worth every cent that you will put down. Yeah, franktalks.com. Oh, you got to go to get your help from franktalks.com. Yeah, yeah. Would you believe that Frank gets results? Yes, we're certain. Just read the reviews. Frank knows his stuff, and Frank's got the goods. Good love can soon come.